So this is All is Being with Grant Davis, take two.
Wonderful. Let me convince my title bar to disappear so that I can see the controls. Oh, I can't screen share yet, James. So if you can allow that, I would appreciate it. Make me co-host. Or host. Okay, I'm in charge now. Very good. All right, I hope you're seeing my shared screen now.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. And welcome everyone. It's very nice to have an audience for the second run through. I always adjust minute by minute to an audience, so it's pretty difficult for me to talk to the ethers with no faces. Appreciate your presence. I want to start with a quote, especially for the geologists in the viewing audience, that helps me focus on why we're talking about the Elohim. First of all, what is matter esoterically? Steiner told us quite clearly in the GA 134 that matter is a heap of ruins of the spirit. A heap of ruins of the spirit. This diagram that he gave us can be imagined as follows. The column with A at the top is representing incoming spirit. So there is some structure in the spiritual world that is moving. The spirits of motion are managing this movement. But at some point, the movement of this spiritual material, content, being, as my title suggests, exhausts itself, as Steiner describes, and scatters, shatters. He uses those terms. And when this spiritual material shatters, it becomes visible as matter. And that's the B and the C. Imagine this as if it was a flow of water that hit something and splashed out in droplets. The droplets are the physical matter. But Steiner said it doesn't hit something, it hits the void. It extinguishes its forward motion and becomes matter. This original spiritual entity had a structure to it. And when the shattering occurs, this structure is described as reversing its direction. And this is the formation of crystals in the physical world. Let us say that the spiritual structure had a fourfold aspect to it. And when that fourfold motion or aspect shatters, we end up with a cubic crystal. That's my imagination of his description. I'm elaborating a bit beyond what the lecture offers. But if we think of physical matter as the creation of shattered spirit, it gives us quite an esoteric feeling for where this whole lecture will be going. Steiner tells us that in the initial creation of the solar system, this shattering is occurring literally in the void. Crystals are reproductions of spiritual forms which through their own impetus kept their original direction but in the opposite sense, and mineral matter results. The next 4 items are fascinating to me as an Aristotelian, as Rob referred to me, because I like to see cause and effect. And the esoteric cause and effect in creation of matter is quite different than the mundane scientific description of physical matter. If instead of breaking into the void, spirit breaks in an area in which the etheric is populating, then when the spirit breaks, it becomes plant matter. Very interesting. He's distinguishing mineral matter from plant matter. Not solid, liquid, gas, warmth, but mineral, and then more enlivened matter, plant matter. If the spirit streaming into the etheric corporality is a corporality in which physical is overweighing already when the spirit breaks, then we get nerve matter. This environment begins because of the influence of Lucifer. And when spirit breaks into an area in which astral body is significant but outweighed by the etheric, we have muscle matter. So I'm just skimming by these. I'm not going to go into any detail. I just am fascinated by the hierarchy of matter that this offers us. Quite different from mundane science or even our more esoteric geology, where we look at the formation of different types of mineral. That's all in number one. Steiner says this same process applies to the creation of the solar system, the creation of the occupants of the solar system in this hierarchy of matter as well. And finally, if the spirit breaks in an area in which ego is significant, then after long detours is bony matter. So I'll leave these behind, but I just had to include it in the talk because for me, as a bit of a mechanist, I love seeing these progressions and all of the thoughts that it engages. But what does any of that have to do with the Elohim? The Elohim are the smiths. The Elohim work with the material that the spirits of will have given us from the early days of Saturn. And they work as smiths, forging in the warmth the crystalline forms of the different earths and metals. Let's take a quick look at all the spiritual beings in the mainstream of evolution that Steiner has described for us, just to make sure we all are oriented and up to date. I think my audience today will find this rather familiar, but I'll go through it quickly and see if anything catches your interest. From the bottom. So this is a chart that I made 20, 30 years ago when the internet just appeared, and I thought I'll make a table of all of Steiner's names. And this table is broken into Steiner's modern names, the much more historical Christian names, concentrated into a document by Dionysius the Areopagita called Celestial Hierarchies, and then many other names that Steiner introduced in his lectures, in which he made a clear correspondence between two of these columns or more. So the ones on the right are curiosity. Sometimes they're very confusing. Some of them even include Persian names, for instance, or I think that's Persian, but Hindu names. So there is an interesting little collection that I undertook a couple of decades ago. And if you're curious, I can let you know where to find this old table, and click on any of the underlined and it'll give you the passage where Steiner equated them. So to start from the bottom, just to make sure we're all in the same working position, we have the third hierarchy, of course, clustered in groups of three. The closest to us, angels, the archangels, and what we typically would call the archi, or the ancient Christian name of principalities, and Steiner's name, spirits of twilight, fire, and personality. And the second hierarchy that we're focusing on today, in particular the spirits of form, with their Christian name of powers, their Greek name of exousia, the Hebrew name of Elohim, some other Christian name, Revelations, and Amshapans, a Persian name. And then I'll work up just quickly the spirits of motion, the dynamis, the spirits of wisdom, the Kuriotetes. And then in the highest of the hierarchies, a collection of three spirits of will, the thrones, spirits of harmony, the cherubim, spirits of love, the seraphim. I will use some of these names interchangeably, and I trust that this audience will have no trouble with that. But if any of the viewers are curious, they can come back to that chart, and hopefully you'll see all the correspondences. Okay, so let's quickly go through the picture of cosmology from the beginning of manifestation of anything that Steiner considers to be a predecessor of our humanity and of our current solar system. We go to the beginning of the creation of our current solar system. We go through earlier incarnations back to a previous solar system, a previous one to that, and in fact, 3 previous solar systems. Just for interest, I'm speaking quickly because the connection is good here, so I will toss in a few things that are new to this lecture. There is a concept in physics or in astrophysics that the composition of our solar system is not explained well by the work of the sun, that the atomic machinery of the sun can create elements, but that there has not been sufficient time in this solar system to create the full range of elements that exist in this solar system, that in fact it must be a thought exercise at the least, that this solar system must have inherited a soup of elements, and then during the creation and work of the sun, elaborated those elements to the 100+ elements we have now. In fact, given the typical age of a solar system estimated by astrophysicists, it's really not practical that we could have done this once. And there is some speculation that coincides lovely or beautifully with anthroposophical knowledge, which is that it must have taken perhaps 3 solar systems of atomic work in preceding suns, inheriting in each case perhaps the result of a nova of the sun, and then collecting together to form a solar system, which again deteriorated in perhaps a nova, and over the vast amounts of astronomical time came together in our dust ball that formed our solar system. So interesting, it's not a total left field for Steiner to suggest something that astrophysics is beginning to approach as well. So we go back to the earliest of these predecessor solar systems, which Steiner calls planetary systems, or cosmos, a confusing term or perhaps a confusing translation. I think that typically in this context always means a group of planets and a central sun. But before that, something that astrophysics would not recognize as the solar system, Steiner describes ancient Saturn, in which in midpoint of the evolution of that entity, ancient Saturn, there was a ball of warmth. Nothing more material than a ball of warmth. So where did that ball of warmth come from? I'm sure the group of us are all familiar that it was described as a sacrifice of very high beings, the spirits of will, sacrificed their lowest component. And over time, that's why I said midpoint, it's warmth. Over time, that sacrificial spiritual substance became materialized to the point at which it could be recognized physically as warmth. So I won't go into details about what Steiner offers us in the development of ancient Saturn. I want to focus in this whole lecture on what the role of the Elohim is. And in this case, in ancient Saturn, the role of the Elohim I can very quickly work up to. The spirits of will sacrificed their spiritual substance. The spirits below them, the spirits of wisdom, enlivened that sacrifice. That phrase, not quite clear what it means. It certainly doesn't sound too physical yet. The spirits below that, the spirits of motion, the dynamis, ensouled that sacrificial substance as a single ensouled being. And now we've come to the spirits of form, the Elohim. The spirits of form, in their work upon this substance, individualized it. So there's a description of the ancient Saturn at a certain point as assuming the form of a mulberry, or a raspberry for us North Americans. And this mulberry is a tiny, a collection of tiny spheres. And these spheres make up the entire globe of warmth. So the warmth differentiates, warmer and less warm, and some of those differentiations can be given a span of space that is somewhat spherical. So tiny spheres of warmth are the result of the effort of the spirits of form, the Elohim. And the description is that these pips of the mulberry would rise to the surface of the ancient Saturn sphere, and at that point would be fully individualized and were the vehicles for the archai to undergo their experiences as their human state and to begin their individual existence in ancient Saturn. And these globes of warmth would descend to the center of the sphere of Saturn and merge with the rest of the warmth. And then they would, this warmth would ascend to the surface and be engaged by the spirits of form and individualize into the mulberries, and back and forth, as if this was the day and night of the archai, or an individual life and another reincarnation, depending on the time frame and how you think of it. Of course, as an aside, we're being told that time is beginning to regulate during this period, that in the early stage of Saturn, time was so chaotic that it could be described as not existing. And so cause and effect really had no meaning in the early times. But as Saturn progressed and the archai worked through their efforts as human stage, time came under their control and the chaos was mastered to some extent. This also is the beginning of our human body. So the archai have inhabited these spheres of warmth, and all of the hierarchies have been enriching and evolving these spheres of warmth. This is the earliest representation of what eventually becomes our human body. So just the concept that the spirits of form had a role even in ancient Saturn. They were beyond their human stage by the time we begin to make contact with them at this point, but they had some work that continues to pay off for us today. So then we'll superficially, let's just flip on to the next one, ancient sun. So after a pralaya, the work of the spirits of will and on down has been dissolved into this spiritual world. And after the pralaya of this spiritual existence, which Schneider says we really cannot perceive, it's something that's too far from our capacity. So it's a hidden period. The spirits of the hierarchies begin to work again in a perceivable way. And we have the beginning of the ancient sun solar system. And at that point, the spirits just below the spirits of will, the spirits of wisdom, make their grand sacrifice, and they sacrifice their lowest component, which we can consider to be etheric substance. The spirits of will sacrifice etheric substance. That may not be precisely accurate, but that's the common anthroposophical narrative. And at that point, the spirits of the spirits of wisdom are assisted by all of the hierarchies below them. And the hierarchy above them, the spirits of will, is holding the space for this to occur. And the first hierarchy is holding the plan. That's a sequence that happens throughout. The highest of the hierarchies hold the plan. The one above the sacrifice holds the space for the creation, and the one that's doing the sacrifice is the one that we acknowledge as the creator of that solar system. So if we continue on down, we reach the spirits of form. And in this case, the spirits of form, interestingly, are paralleling the spirits of wisdom and sacrificing their etheric body. In the Saturn, they didn't sacrifice it, they just engaged in it. But in the ancient sun, they sacrifice their etheric. This becomes an aspect of the will and wisdom substances that comprise Saturn, Saturn and now Sun. And we have an elaboration at the spirits of form effort of individualization once again. In both cases, ancient Saturn and ancient Sun, all of the higher beings are working from the periphery. The spirits that are engaging in their human stage are working from the surface and out into the periphery, but the higher hierarchies are working entirely from the periphery. So the spirits of form are raying down their etheric into the ancient Saturn, ancient Sun globe. As they ray down their etheric, it's being reflected back. The reflection is in the image of the spirits of form, in the image of the gods. So in both ancient Saturn and in ancient Sun, we can say that the human stage is reflecting the image of the gods. This phrase from biblical and other religious passages is supported by the process of raying from the periphery, reflecting back. We are formed in the image of our God. Nice connection there. So again, very superficially, I'll move on to the next solar system, the solar system of ancient moon. This is quite an elaborate solar system. We've gradually been gaining principal substances, warmth or physicality, etheric. Now we gain the astral by the sacrifice of the dynamis, the spirits of motion, sacrificing their lowest component. But in each case, elaboration is also occurring in those substances. So by the time we get to the moon, the warmth has elaborated twice, and we actually have warmth, air, and water. And the etheric has elaborated that we have now light and chemical. No, sorry, we only have warmth, light, and chemical. So we have quite a rich environment in which these higher beings can do their creative work. And what are the spirits of form doing? At this point, the spirits of form, which have similarly paralleled their principal hierarchy in their sacrifice, the spirits of form are sacrificing their astral substance. It's described in the ancient moon and ancient sun as dripping down. They drip down their etheric in the ancient moon. They drip down their astral in the ancient, etheric in the ancient sun and astral in the ancient moon. So they are imbuing the material, and in fact, the individual beings, in this case, the angels are undergoing their human stage with the astral in their image. So we now have beings that are reflecting the gods, thanks to the work of the spirits of form. They are reflecting the image of the gods in all of their forms, from physical through etheric to astral. So at this point, it becomes quite a stretch for our human-bound concepts to encompass what the spirits of form are like at this point. The spirits of form have just sacrificed their astral, their lowest aspect. The spirits of form are now surrounding ancient moon and raining down this astral. And as they have completed that task, they have no astral. The spirits of form are beings of the lowest aspect, ego. So these are beings that, were we to perceive them clairvoyantly, would be would be egos surrounding the ancient moon. Uh, Quite a concept. What beings like that? I am is the first presentation of that being, and all of them around. So I'm not spending time on the cosmology today, so I will move on once again to the evolution of the Earth itself. So we've gone through another pralaya, all of the efforts, elaborations, development that the hierarchies have achieved has retreated to the spiritual realm, is being digested and prepared for a further elaboration when the beginning of the Earth's solar system is undertaken. So the man begins with his, sorry, I shouldn't say man. The solar system begins with its substances of warmth and air and gas and liquid, and three of the ethers. And then the spirits of form take the principal role, and the spirits of form begin to sacrifice their lowest component, which, as you remember, by the end of the moon was the ego. So the spirits of form, in this very quick summary of the mechanics of it, begin to sacrifice their ego substance. And again, it's described as dripping down into the sphere of the Earth sun, because all is one ball at this early point. Described as the ego, described as a fertilizing force. But this, I'm going too quickly. I want to step back now and look at the details of the Earth development, the details from the beginning of the engagement of the Elohim to what we recognize as physical Earth now. So I will scroll up one. Well, I'm teasing you with that. I'll give you a lead in first. So we need to find in the literature, not only of anthroposophy, but of earlier spiritual literature, typically religious literature, some reference to this early period. And all cultures have it, whether it's the all-encompassing turtle, whether it's the mother Gaia, or in the case of the Hebrew tradition, the Genesis lectures. Well, Steiner gave a wonderful coverage of the Genesis lectures. So why do I choose that one for an audience of geologists? Because of this phrase, the development of ancient Hebrew civilization will never reveal its particular secrets unless it is studied as geology in our sense of the term. How do we first come upon the ranks of Elohim or upon the Yahweh God? We meet him first when he wishes to form into man something taken from the earth itself. Therefore, the ancient Hebrew wisdom, since it professed Yahweh God, had to become geology. And this teaching about man that he is formed out of the forces of earth is geology. So that God breathed into the human, that God spit upon the dust. Very physical descriptions of the origin of a human being, as opposed, for instance, to the Greek origin story, in which a spark came from on high and created the beginning of humanity. This spark coming from on high, Steiner describes as a meteorological model, as opposed to a geological model. Interesting use of mundane terms to describe the origin stories that we see. So this is a geological story. This is a story about the material that is being used to create what we are now, and the sequence of that materialization, not the divine spark. So now I'd like to go into Steiner's coverage of the development of the earth and the development of humanity from his Genesis lectures. I'm pretty sure that's my next quote. Yep, indeed, the Genesis lectures. Steiner goes through in particular the first couple of chapters. In the first chapter, in the first verse, in the beginning, Steiner tells us that the anthroposophical positioning of this first verse, we have to think of this as the development of the earth before anything physical exists. This is an early step in the manifestation of the hierarchies before anything physical exists. Nothing perceptible by senses, not even the sense of warmth. Nothing the eye could see in the physical world. And so what was the activity of the Elohim? What is their nature? These beings that have been evolving through the last 3 solar systems, becoming more and more capable to the point at which they are now described as sacrificing their lowest component to start the creation of this world. Steiner said at this point, they are individual beings. There are a number of individual spirits of form, Elohim, each having their own specialties. They have great ability, but one could do this thing and another could do another thing. It's like a group of people. We all have our own skills. They need to come together to undertake this tremendous effort. And they begin to come together in the early days of the Genesis story. And what's the ultimate goal? Very interesting. The ultimate goal of these Elohim is to create man. So Steiner warns us about the egomaniacal perspective that this could incite in us, but that is the goal of this solar system, is to create man. Let's look at the process. What do the Elohim do in the beginning? Steiner in his lectures has a tremendous respect and scholarly knowledge of the ancient Hebrew and the characters that were used. And he describes these characters as they would have been understood by the ancient Hebrews, especially the Hebrew sages who were working with this material. These characters begin with the word bara, and bara, and I don't have the Hebrew characters in front of me, but in Steiner's lectures you can find them. The word bara can be translated in modern terms as pondering. So the first thing the Elohim do is ponder. Could we say think? Well, it's more than think, but they ponder on what they will be creating. And if there's time, I'll describe the different kinds of consciousness of the different hierarchies and how the consciousness of the second hierarchy is especially suited to this pondering to generate material results. The Elohim can be described as pondering 2 clusters of concepts. I'm using my own words now. One is the ancient Hebrew word of hashamayim, and the other is the ancient Hebrew word of haaretz. Now, what do those mean? In the purest sense, the hashamayim is a complex of let's see if I can get this right. Outward manifestation. Something that, as they ponder it, manifests outwards. The second complex of concepts, the haaretz, is a collection of concepts that has inner desire, inwardness. So there are 2 complexes that are pondered here. And at some point in the early Genesis verse, the earth and the heavens separate. And this is the separation that the Elohim, at a spiritual level only at this point, have accomplished. They've separated the inwardness from the outwardness. The outwardness will ultimately manifest as the sun. The inwardness will ultimately manifest as the earth and the other planets, which aren't discussed in Genesis. So we're still at the spiritual level, but this is the source of the manifestation of the solar system at the point, Hyperborean epoch, at the point where the earth and the sun separate. So Steiner tells us the very beginning of the Genesis lectures is the spiritual predecessors of the Hyperborean epoch. I don't know if you know about globes and kingdoms. Take a look at some of Steiner's work in his early days when he was talking to theosophists. We go through cycles and cycles before we finally get to the physical cycle, which we use the great epoch names of Polaris, Hyperborea, Lemuria, etc. So we're before all of that. We're in an earlier round, an earlier globe. So that's all an aside. But just keep in mind that at this early stage, that even all the 7 days of creation are still at the spiritual level only. We haven't reached the physical level. So we're seeing the archetypes of what we will see in the physical realm at this point. The archetype of the separation of the sun from the moon is entirely the purview of the Elohim. And the Elohim are accomplishing this separation of material and separation of activity at the spiritual level. It's described at this point, especially as they have separated, that the Elohim, and he says, of course, this is not appropriate. The Elohim are not hens, but the Elohim are brooding the warmth of the chaotic earth complex. They are as if they are brooding the entire complex. I can't say globe because it's not physical yet. They are imbuing their warmth into this complex of concepts, as if it were a hen radiating over its eggs. And then a few sentences later in Genesis, the spirits of God moved upon the face of the waters. So this is telling us a point at which the earth is differentiating not only in the warmth, but the air, and then at this point moving across the surface of the waters. The liquid has manifested. So the predecessor, the spiritual archetype of liquid, has manifested in this complex that will become the earth. I'm sorry that it's so abstract, but I'm being careful because it's quite easy, and I certainly went through it in my first readings of Genesis, to say, we're now seeing the physical earth appearing before our eyes. And Steiner tells us, no, we're not in the first 7 days. We're seeing the spiritual archetypes unfold before our eyes. At the end of these 5 days, on the 6th day, the gods in the Genesis, the Elohim, speak, and they say, let us make man, as if they were taking counsel of each other, as if they were planning to work together. And Steiner tells us that, in fact, this is a key moment, not only in the evolution of us and of the solar system, but in the evolution of the Elohim. The Elohim, in fact, joined together in a union to achieve something that they could not achieve independently. The Elohim work together and create out of this structures, the complex structures, the archetypes of which we've described, create a man. Not individual man yet, but man as another complex of concepts. And at this point, this complex includes the human etheric form. So we now have a human form in the etheric. This is the form that the full development of ancient sun and ancient moon led towards. This is the form in which we can see what we think of as the modern man. If we were to perceive etherically man, we would see in this ancient earth form the same representation. So we now have a human in etheric form. We take a little aside. This was the 6th day. What are the days? Well, this lecture is entitled All is Being. And indeed, Steiner reveals to us that the days of Genesis are actually archai. The first day is an archai, doing the work passed to him by the Elohim. The second day is an archai, another archai. Successively, 7 principal archai are taking the lead in the work on this material that the Elohim have established. And by the end of the 7th day, we begin to move into, in Genesis, a second set of days into the physical work that the archai in particular can focus as the, let's say, the supervisors of the work, with the Elohim as the architects of this work. And just to make the picture sufficiently complex, there are a series of archai, which are the days, or the yom in ancient Hebrew, and there are counterparts to each of these archai. There is a night in between each of these days. There's the first day and the first night, the second day and the second night. And the Hebrew word for night is Layla. And so there are a series of 7 principal beings, which are not the mainstream archai, but are working at an equivalent level to them. This is not a lecture about archai, so I won't go into any detail there. But the Elohim have assigned to their Yom and Layla, their day and night beings, entire periods of time to accomplish their work. And that's a modern representation of archai as well, the time spirit, the spirit, which in our current cycle is 2160 years. Not suggesting that it took 2160 years for each of the stages of Genesis. That's an interesting question that I won't go into, but the same beings were engaged at that point as assistants, servants, lower materializers of the work of the Elohim. And the goal is described as let us create man, but it's also a goal at the level of consciousness. This solar system is the first appearance of object consciousness. So the goal of the Elohim is also to create the environment in which object consciousness can arise. And humans don't engage with object consciousness until partway through Atlantis, but we are familiar with object consciousness as our principal waking consciousness nowadays. I can pick up an object and deal with it. I can perceive an object out my window. Object consciousness did not exist before the Earth solar system. Object consciousness did not exist for any of the hierarchy before the creation of the Earth solar system. That's a pretty vast question now, to think that the evolution of consciousness is occurring not only for us, but for all of the spiritual world in stages. Not to say that other beings don't have much higher consciousnesses, but this particular consciousness, you could say the lowest of our current consciousness, did not exist before the work of the Elohim to create an environment in which it could appear. So interesting. So a very quick summary of his work, Steiner's work on the Genesis lectures. What happened in this development of man during these 7 days, actually during the 6 days? Oh no, I can include the 7th. I'm just checking my notes. The first day, in terms of the composition of man, the sentient soul was formed. So I said that during this development, we're not physical, but during the first day, the sentient soul of man is formed. The Elohim are holding within them, as if an organ of their own body, the development of man. And the first aspect of man that is developed in the first day is the sentient soul. Then the second day, the intellectual soul is added. So man is consisting of two soul aspects, two astral aspects. The third day, the consciousness soul is formed. Not until the fourth day, this is so strange for me to really work on, but not until the fourth day is the astral body itself formed. So the astral body contains soul forces which are formed before it is formed. That gives me a lot to think about. On the fifth day, the Elohim form the etheric body, and we are gradually encapsulating these soul forces that were created on the first 3 days. On the sixth day, the physical body is formed of warmth. So now we have a rather complex collection of bodies which the Elohim are containing within themselves as they are forming this complex. And finally, on the seventh day, the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The physical body is formed of warmth and air. We now have a physical body that can exist in its independent state of warmth and air. That's as far, Steiner tells us, that's as far as the Elohim intended to proceed. The further densification to us as we exist now is due to the influence of Lucifer, the descent from paradise. Okay, interesting concept. At this point, we were individualized sufficiently that we exist on the earth. The Elohim can drip into us their sacrifice of the ego, and we are beings, well, not on the earth, but in the surrounding atmosphere of the earth of warmth and air. The physical earth is proceeding to densify, and now we're getting into the realm of Mr. Bosse that all of us are so eagerly studying in his great magnum opus. We're getting into the realm of the physical earth, the living earth, and then ultimately the dead earth and the living mantle of us plants, individualized plants, animals, and humans. But before that, the Elohim were almost done with us. The Elohim had created individual humans from warmth and air. So what would we look like if Lucifer had not involved himself in our evolution? We would be a manifested, again, only warmth and air, but a physically manifested head. That's the A. The rest of it, whether differentiated spiritually or not, would not be physically manifested. We'd be essentially a ghost. Looked at clairvoyantly, there would be a body floating around under the physical head, but looked at physically, there would be a head floating around. So an interesting picture of a human being condensed to become flesh. Quite a minimal amount of flesh, if we can call it that. Sorry, this is from the fall of spirits of darkness. And just to take a quick leap before I jump into some of the other details, this is the beginning of our physical evolution. What's the end of our physical evolution look like on this earth? The impact of the spirits of form will gradually wane as we gain control of our freedom, as we become manifest as the beings of love that we're intended to be. We will become much less physical. Increasingly, the human form, the form of the body, and the form of his thinking and feeling will reflect his inner being and his moral or immoral nature. Now we're getting into the sixth epoch and ultimately the seventh epoch at the end of the physical manifestation of the solar system. We will become beings of very little corporeality and then ultimately beings entirely spiritual while the physical solar system continues to exist. So that was a really quick summary of our physical evolution. The spirits of form will have little to do with us. That was the point I wanted to bring in on the topic of this lecture. As the solar system continues, we will begin to disengage from their control as we have, and as we are beginning to disengage from the control of Lucifer and ultimately of Ahriman, well, not ultimately, consecutively of Ahriman, etc. So I'm going to hop around. I still have about 8 minutes before the hour is up, and I know I'm not really on the clock, so I'll work through some more of the more miscellaneous material that really intrigued me, that relates to the role of the Elohim in this solar system. Here's a good one. Creation of the physical planets. The physical planets exist because of the work of the spirits of form and the abnormal spirits of form. Let's talk quickly about that. During the evolution of the hierarchies, as they proceed in their capacities to greater and greater levels, some of the group of that hierarchy are held back, is the phrase I prefer to use, and are then described as backwards or abnormal. There are a group of what would have been the group above the spirits of form, the dynamis. There are a group of dynamis that did not progress in their evolution at one point in their evolution. It's not exactly clear which of the solar systems they held back, but when they failed to progress, and let's make it simple and say it was the solar system of Ancient Moon, when they held back and did not progress to be able to come out of the pralaya as spirits of motion, they came out of the pralaya as spirits with the equivalent capacity of the spirits of form, but a richer and longer history. So they aren't spirits of form, they're spirits that function as spirits of form and look like spirits of motion. These abnormal spirits of form interact with the normal spirits of form, our favorite in this lecture, the Elohim. They interact in a spatial manner. The spirits of form are residing on the sun. And I haven't talked about the separation of Yahweh and the other six Elohim, the other six principal Elohim. But the spirits of form are residing on the sun. That's their center of influence. And the spirits of form are responsible for individual planets. Each planet has its own spirit of form. We could say that Yahweh is our spirit of form. Each planet, even though the spirits of form are working from the sun, has its own spirit of form as the principal architect. What the spirits of form are creating is the etheric sphere of that planet. The etheric sphere, Steiner describes it actually as more of a lens, if you think of it compressed from the top and bottom, reaches out to the orbit of that planet. So the spirit of form of Mars has etheric material that it's responsible for all the way from the sun to Mars. The spirit of form of Jupiter has etheric material that it's responsible for all the way from the sun to Jupiter. Similarly Saturn, similarly Mercury, Venus, Earth. And these clearly have an area of interaction and then an area of primary influence. So the spirit of form of Mars reaches out to the Mars orbit with its etheric material. A different etheric material is the responsibility of the spirit of form of Jupiter. It reaches out all the way through the spirit of Mars range of influence all the way out to Jupiter. And so does the spirit of Saturn, and yet it goes even farther. And so between Jupiter and Saturn, we could consider is just the material responsibility of spirit of Saturn. So that is what the spirits of form would accomplish on their own. A lens-shaped expanse of etheric material, which is their responsibility to organize. So when Steiner speaks so often about the realm of Saturn, the realm of Jupiter, the realm of Venus, he can be physically, at least, speaking of the etheric realm, the realm of the etheric material that these beings are responsible for. We would not have solid physical planets if it were not for the influence of the abnormal spirits of form. They work from the periphery. The point at which an abnormal spirit of form interacts with its corresponding normal spirit of form is at the margin, at the edge of the influence of the normal spirit of form, what we would call the orbit. So a spirit of form of Mars reaches its influence all the way to the orbit of Mars. An abnormal spirit of form from the periphery comes in to meet that normal spirit of form. They interact, a pocket, an invagination forms in the etheric material, and that is filled with physical material. And that finally is the coagulation of the dust of the primeval solar system into a planet. The reason that that dust coagulates at that place is because of the interaction of a spirit of form and an abnormal spirit of form. A pretty powerful spiritual concept. These beings are doing extremely mighty things in our modern scientific paradigms, creating the physical planets, coalescing these collections of dust. So that leads me into the idea of what is a law of nature. A law of nature, something that we consider to be the way things are. Gravity functions. Things are on the earth fall towards the center of the earth. Light disperses. Liquid finds a surface. Those laws of nature are actually, in anthroposophical terms, the deeds of the exousiae. Steiner describes them as these are the deeds of the exousiae. The reason these things happen is because this is the way the exousiae caused them to happen. And then all the lower hierarchies enact this all the way right down to the elementals, in which the minute interactions of liquids, solids, gases, warmth interact to form a growing plant or a complex human being. But the source, the archetype of all of the laws of nature are the deeds of the exousiae. What a lovely way, an artistic concept of the sometimes mundane scientific paradigms. And we're now right on the hour. Let's see if I can toss in one more interesting idea. What did the exousiae have to do with our thinking? So the exousiae created us, including our capacity to think. But the exousiae are described as the owners, the manipulators of cosmic intelligence. And cosmic intelligence is something that we come in some contact with when we think. Steiner describes a very interesting transition in the way we thought in the time of Greece. He says, ending around the 4th century AD. The early Greek literature suggests that Greek, and perhaps that being the leading culture, all other human beings thought in a way that's described as having the thoughts of the gods revealed to them. So a person thought because that's what the gods thought into him. Didn't own your thoughts, you experienced them. You looked at something, a concept came to you, you used that concept in your memory, not because you had thought it up, but because the gods had given you that thought, had placed the thought into you. And then the Greek literature changed to the point at which it was no longer the Furies and the demons who were delivering the thoughts to the ruler who's about to do something dramatic, but in fact, we were thinking our own thoughts. We began to consider that we owned and manipulated our own thoughts. What's happening esoterically at that point? Steiner tells us that at that point, the exousiae handed over the management of cosmic intelligence to the archai. The archai were now responsible for the management of cosmic intelligence. And at that point, the cosmic intelligence has come closer to us, and we can begin to take some ownership of it, as we continue to do, in which we no longer can even perceive the actions of the gods, and certainly think that all the thoughts that television and politicians and everyone else gives to us are our own, and we've thought them up. So we have some much stronger ownership of individual thought now. Okay, a number of other miscellaneous, but I want to end with a fun quote that engages the geologists again among us. There we go, the laws of nature, deeds of the exousiae. And here's the closing quote. If I am able to interpret what appears on earth below, so I'm looking down from the higher concepts to the earth, as an emanation of spiritual beings, then I perceive what lives in cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. But if, in the opposite direction, I am unable to form a spiritual picture of what lives on the earth, if I surrender myself to the illusion of its material appearance, then I remain geologist. I cannot swing myself up to geosophist. Then my being becomes Ahrimanized. So I implore you all to pursue the mindset of a geosophist. Thanks very much. And if there were a group, I would be enthusiastic to take questions. Among this small group, are there questions that you wish, or comments that you wish to share?
Well, Grant, what an excellent presentation. I sincerely hope that you will be open to future invitations that might come your way to speak on these and other subjects of interest to you. I was captivated the whole time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. As I've joined in the work of the geologist group that we are sharing this with, I've been very pleased to see frequent questions that come from the anthroposophist side of each of us about where the spiritual impulse is in the difference between a granite and a schist, and when did the life disappear from the veins of gold. Those are mechanical or physical questions that all of us are always considering as well from the spiritual perspective. So it's wonderful for me to have the chance to focus with a group of scientifically trained people, questions of this kind of esoteric nature.
Are there additional questions for Grant?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please. Oh, I have a delay from my satellite. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. So if I talk over someone, my apologies. Go ahead, Jenabeth.
Well, I was fascinated by that concept that these Elohim created us as a complex, well, I don't know how to say it, complex of concepts. And when you go through the 7 days, you said all these Elohim work together, but did they each have their own say in the sentient soul, intellectual soul, consciousness soul, and astral body? How do you see their individual role?
So the sequence of activities is not elaborated in Steiner's lectures, and I'm not capable of doing that level of research clairvoyantly, so I have to depend on what he offered us. He said that at the point at which the Elohim in the Genesis, for instance, at the point at which the Elohim said, "Let us make man," they had to exert a combined effort. That before that, their individual capacities could come into the fore. And I can imagine, and this is not supported by the lecture material, I can imagine that the individual Elohim had some individual capacity in the separation of each individual planet in the solar system. I can imagine that at that physical level, they had some unique responsibilities. But as they came to the point where they said at the end of the 5th day, I believe it was, or the 6th day, "Let us make man." At that point, they had to unite so that essentially there was no individual effort. The effort was a new being of a united Elohim. At that point, there were 7 of them. Then shortly after that, and I didn't go into any of the details of the Luciferic influence, the Earth was recognized as being too dense for humans to continue their evolution, and would have to either leave the Earth, as so many did for a period of time, or we would have to, not we, as if I'm an Elohim, the spiritual beings would have to create an environment that was more conducive to humans incarnating. And that's the point at which the moon and the Earth separated. And at that point, the Elohim on surrounding this sphere of influence migrated separately, and Yahweh remained with the moon and the Earth, and the other 6 took permanent residence in the sun, but still as a unit. And we could even say continued with that physical separation as a unit of 7. The Hebrew literature refers to Yahweh Elohim as a different level than Elohim. They don't refer to Yahweh individually in the same context. So there is a concept of Yahweh Elohim, the united being that has come into creation during this solar system that has evolved successfully.
Thank you.
Well, any other questions?
Well, I have one more.
Please do.
Go for it.
Sorry. So were you suggesting that the last picture where you talked about this creation of a planet as a combo of the abnormal Elohim and a normal Elohim, that is a similar process there as that shattering of the spirit and the matter, that your first picture?
That's a very good question. I haven't thought from that perspective, so I'll give you a quick thought answer. And that is that the physical matter that coalesces at that point already exists. Astrophysicists would propose that we have a ball of dust, and the ball of dust gradually coalesces. So the creation of that dust was the initial picture of the incoming spirit shattering into matter. The coalescence of that dust is happening because of the interaction of the spirit of form and abnormal spirit of form. So there is an earlier process in which the physical manifests into the world. The normal spirits of form aren't interested in it. They're interested in the etheric.
Oh, yeah.
The influence of abnormal brings in a condition in which the etheric imaginates, and those areas coalesce the physical matter that we think is the solar system.
Great, thank you.
There is a question that was asked last time after the meeting that I'll purposely not address, but just so that you know that this question exists. What's the relationship between, what's the role of Christ in this picture of solar system creation and the picture of the creation of man? Is Christ the same as the Elohim? Is Christ an opponent to Yahweh? What did Christ do in the sun solar system when Christ and Lucifer battled for control of the solar system? Those interesting questions. I'm not going to get into that now, but I spent an hour talking about that to the questioner on the phone. So many other aspects of Elohim and how they fit in the picture of the creation of the solar system and of man.
Well, with that silence, I will thank you again, Grant, give you a big hand, and much appreciated. And I hope that we'll hear from you again soon. I'm going to stop the recording now. Okay. Could you give me back the host, or so I can stop the recording, Grant?
That's important. Yeah, you can't just grab it. I'm happy to give it to you. Make host.
Okay, good.
I didn't notice the recording was going on. I hope it was successfully, because I'm not sure if I'm getting better or worse with each try, but I'd love to have this one